She was left at the church steps after the baby cried. Then a silent rancher whispered. The rain had fallen all night, leaving the earth soaked and glistening under the first pale light of dawn. The old church sat on a rise above the small settlement of New Hallow, its spire cutting against a sky the color of ash. It was there on the broad wooden steps that the child's cries pierced the silence. Wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, the baby's wails carried far into the empty morning streets. A young woman stood trembling, her hand pressed against the child's chest, her heart torn in two. She was not dressed for the cold. Her shawl soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. She had walked miles in the storm to get here, and she knew once she stepped away, she would never forgive herself. But she had no choice. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice breaking. She kissed the infant's forehead one last time and set the basket down against the church's heavy oak door. Her name was Alara Wynne, though the townfolk did not know her story, nor would they care if they did. She had been cast out of the nearby outpost after giving birth without a husband's name to shield her. On the frontier planets, survival was as unforgiving as the storms that swept across the plains. A woman alone with a child was considered a burden few could carry. The child's cries grew louder, as though pleading with her to stay. Alara clutched her shawl and staggered back down the steps, each step heavier than the last. By the time she turned the corner, the church's door creaked open. Inside stood Reverend Calloway, an old man whose eyesight had long dimmed but whose hearing remained sharp. He bent low, startled to find the bundle there. "Mercy," he muttered, lifting the crying babe. His weathered hands trembled, but not from weakness, rather from the sudden weight of responsibility thrust upon him. Yet someone else had already heard the cries before him. Across the street, leaning against a hitching post outside the saloon, a tall, broad-shouldered man stood in silence. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his eyes, gray and steady, followed every motion on the church steps. He did not move, not until Reverend Calloway turned with the child in his arms. The man was known as Calder Drax, though most called him the Silent Rancher. He ran the largest cattle spread outside New Hallow, a lonely sprawl of steel fences and grazing beasts beneath alien skies. Calder rarely spoke, preferring action over words. He had lost his wife 3 years past the fever, and since then he had become a ghost of sorts, moving among men but belonging to no one. That morning, as the babe's cries filled the wet air, Calder felt something stir inside him he thought long dead. He crossed a muddy street in heavy boots, his long coat dripping with rain. Reverend Calloway looked up in surprise as Calder's shadow fell across him. "A foundling," Calloway said softly, "left to the Lord's mercy." Calder's gaze lingered on the child. Tiny fists waved in the air, fragile but determined, as though demanding a place in this harsh world. "Boy or girl?" Calder asked, his voice low and rough, as though in used to speech. "A girl," Calloway said. "Poor thing. What kind of mother?" But Calder raised one gloved hand, silencing him. Then, with a surprising gentleness, he touched the babe's tiny hand. The wailing ceased. The little fingers curled around his leather glove, holding tight. Something passed between them in that instant. Something unspoken but powerful. Calloway blinked. "Well, I'll be—" Calder looked up, his gray eyes steady. "She stays with me." The Reverend's brows knit. "You? Calder, you live alone out there on the range. You've no wife, no family, no nursemaid to tend to her. This is no small matter." But Calder only shifted the child into his arms, as though he'd been carrying babies his whole life. The infant settled against his chest, sighing softly. For the first time in years, something warm cracked through the rancher's cold silence. "She stays with me," he repeated. And with that, Calder Drax turned and walked back into the misting dawn. The baby held close. The ranch of silence. Life on Calder's ranch was a world away from the crowded streets of New Hallow. His land stretched far into the horizon, where alien cattle, broad-shouldered beasts with curved horns and glowing eyes, grazed beneath a red-tinged sky. The wind carried the scent of dust and wildflowers, and at night the stars burned brighter than anywhere else on the frontier. But the ranch was quiet, too quiet. Since his wife's death, Calder had spoken little, and his ranch hands respected his silence. He ate alone, rode alone, and worked with a grim, unyielding determination that left no room for comfort. Now everything had changed. The baby, whom Calder named Marin after his late wife, brought life back into the ranch. At first, the men were baffled. A hardened cattleman raising a newborn? Some thought he'd gone mad. But Calder's stern gaze silenced their doubts, and soon they found themselves doing tasks they'd never imagined. Rocking the cradle between branding shifts, fetching milk from town, even humming lullabies in rough, off-key voices. Calder himself was transformed. Though he spoke little, his actions spoke volumes. He built a warm room for Marin with his own hands, whittled small toys from scrap wood, and rode to the trading post at dawn to fetch supplies no one thought he would ever care about: blankets, dresses, bottles. Yet despite the newfound warmth, Calder remained haunted. Each night, when the baby slept, he would sit by the fire and stare into the flames. Somewhere out there was a mother who had abandoned her child, a mother whose face he did not know. He wondered if she lived or if she was gone forever. And though he never said it aloud, part of him longed to know why she had left the girl behind. Illyra struggled. Illyra Wynne had not gone far. After leaving her child, she wandered the outskirts of New Hallow, surviving by cleaning floors of the tavern and sleeping in barns when storms rolled in. Every night, she dreamed of her baby's face. Every dawn, she woke with tears on her cheeks. Rumor spread quickly in small towns. She overheard whispers of the silent rancher taking in a foundling, raising her as his own. Relief and sorrow warred within Illyra. Her child was safe, but in another's arms. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, she ventured near the Drax ranch. From the ridge, she watched Calder ride across the pasture, the child strapped safely against his chest. The sight broke her heart and mended it at once. She wanted to run down, to confess, to beg for forgiveness, but fear held her back. What if he turned her away? What if he hated her for abandoning her daughter? So she remained hidden in the shadows, watching as her child grew from afar. The threat, peace never lasted long on the frontier. Beyond the town and ranches roamed scavenger bands, raiders who preyed upon cattle herds and unguarded settlements. One such band, led by a ruthless man named Corvin, had long-eyed Calder spread. With no family, few allies, and miles of open land, the silent rancher seemed an easy target. But when Corvin's scouts reported that Calder now kept a baby in his home, the outlaw's cruelty sharpened. A weakness, he sneered. The mighty rancher tied down by a squalling brat. One storm-dark night, they came. Fire on the ranch. The men struck at midnight. Torches flaring, gunfire cracking across the pastures. Cattle scattered in terror, their glowing eyes flashing like embers. Calder's ranch hands fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Inside the ranch house, Marin cried out as smoke seeped through the shutters. Calder burst through the door, his long rifle in one hand, his daughter in the other. His silent fury was terrifying. He fought with the strength of 10 men, never speaking a word, only moving with deadly precision. But even he could not hold them all. A raider wrenched a child from his arms in the chaos, raising a knife. No! The voice rang out like thunder. Everyone froze. It was the first word Calder had shouted in years. But the voice had not been his alone. From the shadows of the doorway, Illyra Wynne appeared, wild-eyed, mud-smeared, clutching a pistol she barely knew how to use. "That's my daughter," she cried, her voice trembling with rage. For a heartbeat, the battlefield paused. Then the pistol fired. The raider dropped, and Illyra rushed forward, seizing Marin into her arms. Calder stood stunned, his gray eyes wide. Illyra met his gaze, tears streaking down her face. "I'm her mother. I never stopped being her mother." The whisper. When the smoke cleared and Corvin's men fled into the night, the ranch lay battered but standing. Calder leaned against the porch post, his hat low, watching Illyra cradle Marin by the firelight. For a long time, silence hung between them. Finally, Illyra turned, her voice breaking. "I was a coward," she whispered. "I left her because I thought I couldn't give her a life. I thought maybe someone stronger could. And then you gave her everything." She shook her head, clutching Marin close. "If you send me away now, I'll understand. But please, let me see her, even from afar." Calder's boots scraped softly on the wood as he stepped closer. He looked down at the woman before him, the mother who had been broken, and the child who had mended them both. For a long time, he said nothing. Then at last his voice came, low and rough but steady. "Stay." Illyra's breath caught. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You're her mother," Calder whispered, the words like a vow. "And I can't do this alone anymore." The ranch, one silent, filled with the sound of a baby's laughter, a mother's tears, and the soft murmur of a man rediscovering his voice. And from that night on, none of them were ever truly alone again.